Yeah, like for that. Put it like that where you have it there.
I can't, help me. Is, okay, it's on. The top bar doesn't always. Good, good.
Invited you to solve everything, but I don't think you
Yeah, connectivity and.
I like it. Oh, mom, it's not speaking. Oh, now we gotta get through this first thing, the rest of it is like that.
No, I mean, the others just kind of give you all a heads up on some stuff. That doesn't need to take long. Depends on your. I am ready.
5:30, let's go. Meeting to order. This is a workshop meeting of the Port Lavaca City Council, and this is Monday, March 2nd, 2023, and the time is 5. March 27th. March 20. Oh. March 27th at 2023 at 5:30 p.m. And we're skipping the usual meeting formalities for workshop. Get one of our accounting and Alan Tippett. Sorry, Alan, we started on time. Normally I wait for chance. That's it. Yes, right. The first thing we have to do before any meeting or workshop, I have to ask anyone here from the public that wants to make a general comment on a regular agenda for council, which you would have to do so at this time. So. There's no one here to make general comments, so I will turn the meeting over to Jody Weaver, and she will begin with the first agenda item.
I want to thank everybody for showing up tonight. This is a great turnout. The first item on tonight's agenda is to review and discuss our draft copy of the final report for the downtown waterfront master plan. The city council engaged with the LJA engineers and planners last summer, and the project designer architect on the project has been Ernesto Alfaro, who's with us here tonight. He's going to go through the plan that's been worked on with primarily with the visioning committees. There's a number of people on this committee that is made up of volunteers from the community. I'll just list them real quick here. The ones that we are recognizing as part of the report. If I've missed something, somebody, if you know that we've missed somebody that needs to be listed, please let me know. I'm trying to make sure we did not do that. Larry Nichols, Lindy Kane, Michael Elgin, Olga Stetzel, Paulette Clay, Robert Knox, Rashonda Thomas, Steve Marwitz, Tanya French, Tim Dent, Tony Tapp, Amy Blanchett, Betty Birdwell, Bill Reagan, Bobby Joe Bearfield, Debbie Hamilton, Gary Crone, James O'Neill, Jan Reagan, Jeff DeRosa, Jocelyn Hatchett, and Justin Weaver. Those are the people that have been on the visioning committee. We've also had a couple workshops with both planning board, commission, parks board, and council invited as well. But we've taken all that information and all the back and forth dialogue and are ready to present the final report. We're calling it a draft because there's still an opportunity to put your 2 cents in if you haven't before, or if you brought something up before and it's not reflected in this, and you really think it should be, let us know. We can still make one final edit or we adopt this as our master plan moving forward. Again, understanding that there's nothing in here that's set in stone, right? This is a guide. This is our plan, gives us something to work towards, an instrument we can use in making grant applications for dollars to help us do this. So there, even when we adopt this, that doesn't mean that it's going to end up looking exactly like what's on here. But this is a guide. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ernesto, who's going to guide us through this document.
Thank you, Jody. I am always very happy to come for Lavaca. I think it's my 5th or 6th time down here. It's a very lovely town. I enjoy the project very much. We architects and planners, we live in a constant state of seeing what could be. And so when I come here, it's great because there's so much potential for a lot of things to happen. Jody stole my thunder. I was going to say 2 of the things that she mentioned. One, that this is very much a collective vision. This is not one person or a very small group of people that have come up with this overall grand idea. We want this to be a collective vision. We want our work to reflect what you all want or need in your waterfront downtown redevelopment. It's very important to us that we were very reflective of that. And that's why you can see that there's a whole host of folks and names and so forth. So the work is not being done by myself. I also have a team of people behind me. I would not be able to without their support and help, and they're listed on this report as well. The other thing I wanted to also mention is the difference between a master plan report and what would be considered a construction drawing, right? So a construction drawing in the work of that architects produce is essentially a tool to communicate to a contractor what to build, the exact thing, how you should build what it is that we're trying to do. This is not that. Is first and foremost, what is the vision? What is the intent? What are we trying to accomplish? What do we hope that this thing could be, right? And so it's after we go through this and all agree that this is something that we all share in, that the work of producing the drawings that make the things that we see in this report, that's when that will happen, when the blueprints might get built, or what we would say construction drawings would get made. Okay, so there's a very big difference. It's very, very easy, and sometimes even architects forget about this, that what this is simply showing a vision or an intention, right? So even though we have a drawing that says one thing, that doesn't mean that it's going to get built that way. Okay, and it's really, really important to remember that. Right, so I guess we want to talk a little bit. So generally what we're going to do today is we're simply going to page turn. We're going to go through the document. We're not going to read everything that's on here, but it's simply to make sure that what we have on here is appropriate, is correct, is representative of what Port Lavaca is, that sort of thing. So we begin with a little bit of history, a little bit of context. And as we were going through the process and trying to understand a little bit more about Port Lavaca, there were 3 elements that were really important to me and to us and to my team, and it's things that we shared with Jody and with the visioning committee. And it had to do with the importance of the base ecology in the way that it formed the city, right? The city would not be here without that aspect, right? It's really, really critical. The other thing that's important is fishing as a cultural tradition. The importance of fishing to Port Lavaca, I think, cannot be underestimated, and that it'll go on to become one of the core elements that we're going to talk about. And then lastly, because of this is a waterfront redevelopment, but it's also a downtown waterfront redevelopment, right? So we have the water at the downtown, and the downtown core is, in my opinion, really important to the city. Some of the oldest buildings in Calhoun County are here. Main Street Theater itself, I think, is a beautiful building, and I think is a kind of a core or grounding element in downtown. So it's really, really important. Well, before I go any further, I talk real fast. I'm from the East Coast. That's just kind of the way I am. If you guys need me to stop or say something again, or if anybody wants to stop and ask a question, please feel free to do so. That's the purpose of the workshop, is to be as conversational, I think, as possible. That's what I want anyway. Okay, let's go on a little bit. So we begin with a couple of images about what Port Lavaca is, what it has been, where it is now. And then we get to a document like this. This is where we start talking. Well, wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. So we're going to go through this document. We're going to talk about our design approach, the methodology that we use. We're going to talk about the different districts, why we have districts. And then we'll talk about each one in a little bit of detail, and then we'll kind of conclude. That's your overall big picture of how we're going to approach this thing. Okay. So at the very beginning, there's a kind of an analysis of the site and what is important, what is relevant, where can we draw inspiration, that sort of thing. And then we'll go from there into the design work. Where did we go with that inspiration, with that analysis? How did that result in project, and how does that project unfold? That's generally speaking how we're doing it. So we begin with a big overall view of what the city is, where there are the like existing elements, right? The important inventory elements is what we refer to them. And then we'll do a little bit of a detail looking specifically at the Bayfront Park and downtown. What are the core elements? You can already see that there are colors associated with different parts of the overall site. So what does that mean? Why are those things there? It'll be apparent as we go forward, but the colors are definitely corresponding to the different areas that we've identified in the site. And so here's some visual imagery that talks about what that site is, the things that are important, how relevant Bayfront Park here is. I think, in my opinion, Faber Stelling Park is a really important plaza space, and I think it definitely needs to be celebrated. As is Port Boyd Bay, I think it's a really important kind of cultural thing for us, and the railroad depot. So these are existing things that are already there. These are the elements that are going to give the project its authenticity, its identity. It's going to ground the project essentially. So where do we begin? And one of the things that we started with, that the visioning committee shared with us, was this logo for the Chamber of Commerce. And look, I'm a designer, right? So I care a lot about colors and about design and pattern. And the logo here, I was like, wow, okay, that's a lot of stuff going on. But what is it trying to communicate? What is it telling us? What's important about that particular logo? And for us, it was the vibrancy. I think that Jody and some of the other visioning committee members, what they liked about it is what it said about what Port Lavaca is and who the people of Port Lavaca are. There's a cowboy boot, there's a sandal, there's birds, there's fishing, and there's color. There's lots of color. So it was that vibrancy that for me was really, really important. So we took the colors that we had on this logo and we kind of adapted it and expanded a little bit to give us a couple of more options. Okay. But it's about that vibrancy and about trying to communicate some of that idea. That led us to think about, okay, well, we have this very, very large site. How do we begin to get a hold of this thing? Okay. What I tell, I'm also a professor of landscape architecture at Rice, and what I tell my students all the time, and what I tell my young planners all the time is, look, when a problem is too big, you have to break it down into smaller constituent parts. When you do that, it becomes a lot easier. You can tackle it in a more specific manner. Okay. So that's what we did. To me, it became very evident that there were already specific microgeographic regions of the overall site. So how do we break that down? What do we do with those things? And it became clear that we were in need of creating districts that would talk about something specific about that site. And each district could have those colors. So we're taking the inspiration from the many colors of the Chamber of Commerce logo. We're looking at the geographic site and we're going, okay, each district has a color, it has an identity, and it becomes identified. Once you do that, and we started originally with the 6 that we have here, Bayfront Park itself, along with the downtown area and Commerce Street, and we added to it City Harbor District because it became pretty obvious early on actually, it would be more like halfway through, would
Yeah.
you say? About halfway through the process, that we needed to include City Harbor as part of this overall vision, right? Because we shouldn't confine it just to Bayfront Park itself. I go to that one, perfect. So when we started thinking about those districts, it became clear to me like, oh, this is where we can start thinking about a name for the district, a color for the district, and something that identifies an icon that would begin to tell the story about what that district is. And when we talk about the districts, I'll say a little bit more about that, but suffice to say at this moment that we had, it was clear to us that we would have a City Harbor, a Main Street, Commerce Street, what I'm calling Bayfront Commons to begin to separate all of Bayfront Park down into discrete elements. So we have the Commons, Bayfront Commons, Bayfront Park Pier, the Marina, and then lastly Smith Harbor, which operates in this own sort of way. Let me see. Oh, yeah. So why is that important? Why is it have these in my mind became banners that would be applied in each district? Why is that important? Why is that relevant? Well, what happens is it begins to tell the story of that district. It begins to brand the district in a particular way or a particular flavor, because we humans, we like pattern, we see pattern recognition, and we begin to associate things. Oh, the yellow theater masks. Oh yeah, that's right, that's Main Street District, right? So you begin to immediately identify a district with an icon, and it begins to create a place. That place also helps you with being able to find your way around the overall site. We're here in the Main Street District, but we're going to go meet somebody at the greenhouse right off the Commerce Street District, that kind of thing, right? So it's easy to identify, it's easy to communicate to someone where something is because of that color and iconographic representation, okay? So we have all that beginning to work, but we're going to step back for a moment and we said, okay, well, what are the characteristics of Port Lavaca that are going to help us shape this project in a more meaningful way? And that's when we started thinking about those elements, the bayfront ecology, the fishing, and the importance of the downtown core and the sort of the textural aspect of the downtown core, the buildings themselves, the architecture and the armature of all that, right? The physicality. And that's when we arrived at this idea that there would be three major characteristics of Port Lavaca that would begin to define and give shape and give a reason for why people would want to come to the downtown waterfront area in the first place, right? Because you have to give people a reason to want to come. This is a destination project, okay? We are trying to create a sense of vibrancy, a sense of life, a sense of place. And how do you do that? You find the elements that are already there and you expand on them. You kind of magnify them in a very specific, intentional way. That's what we're trying to do. So we have ecotourism, right? With like bird watching is really popular. The fact that Smith Harbor is there waiting for habitat restoration to us seemed, look, it's easy to talk about ecotourism. Ecotourism is growing in popularity throughout the country in a significant way. I think that's very clear. If you have any questions about that, we can talk at length about that. Fishing also, I mean, the infrastructure for that is already on the site. Bring it up. Let it be one of the three major elements. Threes are always good, by the way. Threes are, that's how stories get told in the best way. 3 acts, that kind of thing. And then the arts. Why the arts? Why is that relevant? Because art is a language that everyone can speak. Not everybody can paint. Not everybody can sculpt or sing or dance, but everybody has something. I knit. I cook. I play tennis. I don't know, whatever. I garden, right? Can be considered an art, right? What we're suggesting here is to think of art or art practice in a more expanded sort of way, to include all the kinds of storytelling is an art, to include all the kinds of things that make up human existence. Okay, so when your grandmother tells you a story, right? That's an act of artistic expression. When your grandfather cooks something for you, that's also an act of artistic expression. Think about it in a much more expanded sense. Everyone has a connection. You know somebody who knits. You know somebody that does traditional, what we could consider traditional art, like visual art, painting or music or things like that. And because of the presence of the Main Street Theater, for us, it was easy to say, look, art can be one of those core elements that can, it just doesn't have to just stay in the downtown area. It's something that can exist throughout the site. And that's what we're trying to do. To some extent, we're trying to use all of these elements throughout the site. Okay. Now, one of the first things that we started thinking about in terms of approaching Bayfront Park itself, right? Because to some extent, you have the downtown and Commerce Street. And I'm saying Commerce Street because I know that there's a division between South Commerce and Commerce. But when I say Commerce Street, I'm talking about both sides as they extend to the east and west of the park, roughly east and west of the park. We know that we have some challenges with vehicular traffic. Now, this one is the hardest pill to swallow for everyone because we Texans, we love our cars. I love my car too, but we cannot give privilege to the car if what we're trying to do is create spaces for people. People are not cars, right? And so the first thing for us to think about is how do we manage vehicular flow so that we can create safe pedestrian spaces? Because we want those pedestrians in the downtown area. You want the pedestrians in walking around through the park. Now, I know we have a whole bunch of vehicular access through Bayfront Park right now. And so it's about, it's not to say, look, we can't have cars anymore on the site at all, but how do we manage it in a way that makes it safe for people and for the cars? That's generally the conversation. And I know that that's really hard to accept, but I think that there's a middle ground. I think that there's a way to get at a compromise that doesn't totally do away with vehicle access onto the site, but that does control it a little bit. So one of the first things that we talked about was, well, what if we could control the direction of vehicle traffic? What would that do? So there's something called that it's kind of gaining in popularity throughout the country, putting roads on. It's called a road diet, right? Because for so long, cars have been given free reign of streets at the cost of people space on a street, right? If you start thinking about how much space on a right of way, how much space is allocated for people versus how much is allocated for cars, it's a big imbalance, right? It's heavily skewed towards the cars. But if we try to manage that a little bit, and we can do that by controlling the direction of travel, vehicular travel, then maybe we can make some safer pedestrian spaces. And so that's one of the things that we talked about. Initially, we were very, very ambitious about how many streets we could change the flow of traffic. And now it just comes down to Main Street heading northwest and Railroad Street traveling in the northeast, and then Railroad Street in the opposite direction. And so those are the only streets that would be impacted. And that's really only between Commerce and Virginia Street where that would come in. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, just that we're talking about, approaching TxDOT about making Main Street one way from Virginia to Commerce Street.
And just, is there precedent for that? Sure. How likely is TxDOT to grant us this? Unknown.
We don't know.
You could consult an 8-ball and you would get a 50-50 chance right there. So it's a little bit tricky. But what this diagram on the right hand is trying to say is it's trying to look at how does vehicle flow work through the site? What kinds of traffic do you have? Because we also have boat traffic that we have to think about as well. There's pedestrian trails that are coming through here. So it's a lot of movement of people and cars. And so it's really important to think about those things and see how do we manage that stuff. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the Main Street District. And so when we talk about these different districts, each one is going to have a general boundary, a general limit, and the sort of the brighter yellow in the upper right hand corner is really defining the limits, but the kind of the overlay yellow around it, that box around it, is kind of where the district bleeds into. So that overall region really could be considered the Main Street District. And what kinds of things are we looking at there? Go back. I wanted to talk about the smaller image a little bit because there were some major elements that we wanted to think about here. A potential for a district plaza, an overall location where people can come together for pop-up markets, for things that are temporary, not anything physical permanent, but potentially a temporary situation. Faber Sterling Park could, in my opinion, could use some help with some landscape adjustments and things like that, just to help improve its appearance. And then because it's immediately adjacent, more or less, to the railroad depot, our sense was that, look, you could take a linear park and go all the way to Commerce Street from Virginia, and it would create this amazing pedestrian link between City Hall and the Commerce Street area. And then one of the last things that we talked about is the potential for parking structure. Now, here again, we Texans, we love our parking lots, but it's way more efficient and could potentially be a source of income to have a structured parking garage that confines all the vehicles to one space. Again, it's about containing vehicles, but giving them a sufficient space to be able to do things. So that's something that's much further down the line, but it's something that we have to consider when we think about all of Main Street in its entirety. So we have some imagery that gives you a sense of what that would begin to look like. A single lane traveling in one direction with on-street parking to the side, vegetated planting with some trees, giving more people spaces, right? So we're taking this much road away in favor of adding more people spaces. If we go to this one, okay, so this gives you a sense of what that overall image could look like. Again, we have the pop-up or temporary market space. We have Main Street that's going one way to the northeast in the direction of Bayfront Park. We have the Railroad Depot Park, what we're calling Railroad Depot Park, as a linear park that takes you along that way, that celebrates the fact that the railroad was so instrumental in the making of Port Lavaca. And then we have some ancillary spaces, right? Potential art opportunities, potential little plazas, ways of trying to engage the built fabric in a meaningful way. I want to say one thing about the colors, because I know you're all looking at it and going, that's a lot of yellow. And it is a lot of yellow. But and it's not like we're thinking, let's take a giant bucket of yellow paint and drop it all over here, but rather to say that yellow is the identity or theming color of the district. And we would want that to show up, not everywhere, but in key moments or key locations where people see it, on lampposts potentially, on benches potentially, or waste receptacles, things like that. There are ways of branding and theming that are not ostentatious, they're not obnoxious, but that definitely give you a sense of, oh, okay, yes, yellow is the color that we're using for this particular district. Orange is for Bayfront Park. Purple is for the marina, that kind of thing. You begin to associate a specific district with a specific color, and you do that with little moments of color. Now, for the purposes of the plans, they're much more exciting when there's a whole bunch of color on. Along with every sort of large scale plan that we show, we're also going to show a series of next steps, and we're dividing that in terms of what kinds of things can you do in the short term, what kinds of things can you do midterm and long term. Now, this is only in terms of design time to be able to do this, because the actual work itself is even longer. But you have to be able to have a sense of what can we do very quickly, what's going to take a little bit more investment, and what is going to take a really serious amount of time. And so that helps you to prioritize, to think through what is reasonable, and so on. In every single one of these things, the short term, we were looking for the easy things that you can just drop in. Maybe fabrication could take 3 months at the most. It depends with how supply are these days, although I think it's improving overall in the construction industry. Costs are beginning to come down, which is also a positive sign. But things like graphic identities or wayfinding. Wayfinding is signage or banners, things like that. And then theming pedestrian crossings. What does that mean? Well, one thing that we felt it could be really useful and inexpensive is having, for example, crosswalks that are painted in the particular district that you're in. These are really easy to do. They're thermoplastic paints that are normally used on curbs, on curbsides and parking lots and things like that. There are many examples of that being used in a decorative manner, and it doesn't take a lot to replace it. The maintenance is relatively inexpensive for that sort of thing. Yeah, so things like the midterm are looking at the traffic direction change, looking at potential lighting packages. Lighting is a really important thing in creating a safe pedestrian experience. People feel safe when they can see a way in and out of where they are. So that's why, for me, lighting is something that's it's important. That could take a little bit longer time, but in terms of designing it, it doesn't take too long. And there are ways to do it that's inexpensive. There are like solar options that would be really cost effective for a place like Port Lavaca that is also where there's a lot of sun. And then we have the much longer deals like the parking structure, the railroad depot park, and the Sterling Park renovation. All right, next. So here's like a before after concept of how do you turn Sterling Park into a potential performance venue, into a place where there's enhanced, landscaping, where there's a potential for, Instagrammable moments, things that are going to draw attention. That's kind of the goal, but also preserving the things that are historic, that are very much of the place, right? It's not about erasing anything, but rather keeping and celebrating. I should have mentioned that this whole endeavor, this whole way of thinking about how to preserve or how to restore is part of something called creative placemaking. So in the 70s, something called placemaking was invented or discovered or something. Where you talk about the relevance of a place and how do you restore it. And so some people object to the making aspect of it because you can say, well, Sterling Park has always been here. You don't have to make it. You have to restore it. You have to keep it. And so sometimes it's called place keeping and sometimes it's called place finding. There's a lot of debate about what it should be called. But what it amounts to is celebrating the things that are here in an aesthetic way, a visual way, in a way that enhances what it is. That's basically what it comes down to. And that's what creative placemaking is about. Okay. So we're moving closer to Bayfront Park, and we come up to the Commerce District. Why is it a boot? And I did forget to mention. So for Main Street, the identity of Main Street is the artistic core of the project. The identity for Commerce Street would be like, look, because it's called Commerce Street, and because it's a potential for restaurants and things like that, and because it's a transition between the downtown and Bayfront Park. The idea was, look, this could be a retail course. The identity for Commerce Street is that it's very much a place, or at least historically, a place of retail and commerce and things like that. So in terms of the sort of the opportunities plan that we have, there's a potential for the colored pedestrian crossings, which I'm calling ground murals. There's also the possibility for a plaza immediately adjacent here to Nautical Landing to improve the access in and out, the vehicular access in and out of the pier. Jody in particular has been very insistent on an additional turn lane, and I tend to agree that does help improve vehicular safety and pedestrian safety. There's a lot to work out if you have a fully pedestrian plaza and an enhanced vehicle driveway, essentially. There's just some issues to work through there to make sure that it can work. There's also a lot of topography right here at this intersection. So we'd have to think about how do we make that in a safe way so to avoid any potential erosion problems, things like that. Again, those are the kinds of things that you begin to deal with when you're later on in the project, when you're looking at how is this actually going to be physically built. And then over to the more northern side of the site, I suppose, because of the adjacency to Smith Harbor, and Smith Harbor is going to be more of a natural park as opposed to where you're going to play sports or go running or things like that. Our thought there was to think of a community garden, an expanded community garden. Community gardens are really wonderful places where lots of different things can happen, and it's definitely artistic expression, if you have a culinary demonstration garden, for example, if you have greenhouses, if you have the gardens themselves, right? You give people the opportunity to look at having a space of their own to grow kinds of things that they want. There, sometimes it depends on the level of investment, not in terms of money, but in terms of time, how successful those types of places can be. But there are a lot of examples where it's very effective. Let's go to the next one. Another element that we started thinking about is how do you put Commerce Street on a road diet? How do you begin to make sure that you have sufficient parking space, that you have something that improves the aesthetic appearance of Commerce Street itself? And one easy way to do that is with medians, planted medians with palm trees in the center. Palm trees, because palms can take the salinity of the air in this particular region, so it just kind of makes sense to do it that way. We're also talking about a bicycle lane that may have some protection from the sun, so partial shade. That came as a, right here. That came as a result of one of the back and forth sessions that people seem to really want something to that effect. That's a longer term problem. Another thing that we can look at here, you can see the sort of city plaza that we have on the corner here of Main and Commerce. Beyond that is an amphitheater that is really more part of Bayfront Park Commons. The intent is to keep a lot of the elements that we have here and simply enhance as possible. The commercial development, we're saying, look, this is a potential site for commercial development. It doesn't mean the city is going to get involved in developing those restaurant areas or retail areas, but rather the opportunity for that is there. Yes.
But you almost explain why the booth, and then kind of went to why the booth for Commerce Street?
Because it's a retail area, because it's part of the Chamber of Commerce identity. We wanted to bring that booth element back. We know it's important for you also. We wanted to bring some of that iconography to the site and to the property itself.
And if you're talking about restaurants, which I'm really happy about, can you point to the areas where you would have potential restaurant type?
So some of the ones labeled in 4s are potential sites for either, it's a swing. It's either retail or restaurant, whatever it is. And the market is going to decide how that it shakes out anyway.
Okay, thank you.
One element that is important that also about halfway through that Jody and I started talking about, and the vision committee as well, is on number 7, the restoration of the railroad steps. So these are a series of it was a promenade that took you from the downtown into the site itself. There are a lot of photos of what that used to look like, but it basically was a jetty and steps that took you down into the jetty, down into the water, where there was a lot more water apparently back in those days. What else? The stage, the amphitheater, we'll talk about a little bit later. All right, go to the next one, because then we'll talk about what's short term. So short term, again, it's a similar process where it's about the banners, the wayfinding, the ground murals, the stuff that's really cheap and quick to deploy. Those are the things that begin to give a sense of the identity. Once you have a sense of identity, oh, this is this district, this is that district. Once you have a sense of that, then you can begin to look at the longer term projects, and you can begin to make further investment. Because it's all really great to talk a lot about, oh, these are the giant plans that we have in mind. But if nothing happens, then it's just frustrating for everybody involved. That's why it's important to have some short-term goals and to have some like really quick visual examples. And I'll tell you, banners are, it sounds really silly, but banners are really amazing at giving a sense of place, because all of us, we're in the yellow banner area and now we're in the pink banner area. It's also a way of advertising potential events, things like that. And they're very cost effective. So it's, for me, it was really easy to say, look, you can begin to give a sense of that identity by looking at things like the ground murals and the banners. If you just do those two things, it'll change the way that people perceive the area quickly. Bicycle and roadway improvements, again, that's if you doing things like medians in on Commerce Street is going to require a conversation with TxDOT, and who knows, it could work, it might not work, but the idea is to enhance the appearance of Commerce Street, to make it feel special, and make it feel different from the rest of 238. And then you can see that there's the things that are longer term project, that's a much longer list, right? We have potential pedestrian plazas, potential restrooms. Restrooms are important to do. You can do a lot with porta potties and things like that, but having dedicated restroom facilities, it just makes a place feel a lot different. Potential pavilion venues, restaurant improvements. Well, the Bay Shop area plaza is really more part of Smith Harbor to some extent, but we've included here. Again, it's one of those term projects. And then obviously the community gardens with its potential greenhouse and demonstration kitchen. The demonstration kitchen is also a kind of a classroom. And for us, it felt right that there should be some spaces of education throughout the site, right? To some extent, the stage at the amphitheater, also a potential site for education, right? But to have education as a core component felt like the right thing to do as well. And so here's that example of what a planted median would begin to like. Again, it's, the travel lanes would remain. We'd have on-street parking on either side. When roadways get narrower, people drive slower. The wider a road is, the faster you're going to drive because you have all this room. So you're just going to go as fast as you can. I know I do. But so when you begin to narrow it down a little bit, people will take their time. And it's because we're talking a lot about a lot of pedestrian activity on the site, it really is important to begin to slow that traffic down and just make it safe.
How likely is it that TxDOT would approve something like that?
I mean, I've begun the conversation, and they're waiting for this to be adopted to really start looking at it closely. I mean, it wasn't like a hard no. They said, well, they were like, huh, like they, especially on Main Street with the one way, they would be looking to us to provide a study to show an alternate route, but we would start again with just some concepts that we're coming up with. We'll take it step by step, but if at some point, if we pursue this, we would need to do a traffic study and show an alternate route, instead of having Main Street both ways. We haven't really talked about this on Commerce, but again, we're not changing traffic patterns, so I don't anticipate that being an issue. I mean, of course, we would be paying for it, but I can tell you that TxDOT in recent years has become very, very pedestrian friendly. They are cognizant of things like this, and they are supportive generally of projects just like what we're looking at on Commerce Street.
What about trucks? Because didn't we stop 18-wheelers using Main Street a lot? I mean, is there gonna be a problem with that? You've got to do this downtown.
Well, there would be no reduction in the width of the lane itself.
Right.
So a normal.
It just would be one way, yeah.
Yeah, it's just a one way. Yeah, well, on Railroad and Main Street, yeah. But on 238 itself, it wouldn't change the width.
It's just,
of the lane.
yeah, it's just a single lane, so.
Yeah. The physical roadway out here is wider than it really needs to be, right? So that's why for us, we were looking at like, okay, look, you can fit a bike lane, an on-street parking lane, a travel lane, median, and repeat on the other side, minus the bike lane. You can do that in the existing roadway that you have.
I think we already cut it off of Main Street as much as we could. They could go like around.
No, I'll take South 1090. That's the only place that we prohibited.
Well, we're in the process of establishing those truck routes with TxDOT. But, and then of course, if they've got a delivery, they can go wherever they need to go. Right.
Yes, sir, good question.
Well, I was looking at traffic control on Commerce, and so the alternate route would probably solve a lot of that. And so,
Yeah,
I just worry about pedestrians and trucks and lots of vehicles going through it.
yeah, right, and fair point. And one, I don't think that we want to inhibit commerce from taking place, right? So we don't want to inhibit truck routes. But I do think that if we're saying, look, we want this to be a destination, that's for people, and so you have to find a balance.
And 238 is not going to be a truck route. I mean, that's not a truck route, but of course, trucks may go down 238 and making deliveries and stuff, but the truck route, they have to stay on 35 and go down to Alcoa and down and to get down to the harbor, say. They're not supposed to go down
They're not.
238, for any reason than making a delivery. It's not through traffic for trucks.
That, when you say 230, that's awesome.
That's Austin Street and Commerce, yeah.
So, no, fair point, behavior, the law is one thing and the behavior is another thing, and it just takes time for.
And again, I think this is a perfect example too of us saying that, I mean, this is an intent, this is what we would like to see, that
Yeah.
that area of Commerce Street is distinguished somehow from the rest of it. This is what the vision we are this time. If that doesn't work out, that doesn't mean we just throw it out the window.
Yeah.
We come up with, a little different vision of somehow.
Yeah, you modify as you go.
Yeah.
I like that. Man, thank you.
Okay, now we're moving on to Bayfront Commons District. The icon here is the flip flop, because Jody loved the flip flop. We're bringing it back. For us, it made a lot of sense to think about this as the active core of the park. So there's different type of recreation, and they're roughly divided into two. There's active recreation, passive recreation. Your passive recreation is something more like bird watching and hiking and things like that, whereas the active recreation is the sports and all the physical activity stuff. And one of the, we looked at this and we said the nearest beach is kind of a little bit far away. What if we could have a little bit of a beach element here? Bayfront Park Commons is not the pier, it's immediately adjacent to the pier. So while fishing is nearby, this can have a slightly different identity. And that's what this is about. So for example, there was a call for a disc golf course. And to some extent you could do that, but you almost need a little bit more land. We think that there's a way that you can have at least a half course or something like that on here. And that would be, I don't know how big the disc golf community is, but they would have a space for them here that we're talking about. Number one right there. Number three, I wanted to put the disc golf people in here, and Jody poo-pooed it. She said, no way, you can't do that.
We're not playing disc golf in the wetlands.
No, you can't play. We would not be allowed to do that. So we're going to keep it as a preservation area. So yeah, the sort of the natural or passive recreation is going to happen more on Smith Harbor, but we have little elements coming through here. One of the big things that we talked about was having stage and amphitheater, and we wanted to take advantage of the way that the site is already sloping right here adjacent to the pier itself, between sort of the wetlands area and where we are right now. And we thought that would be a good opportunity to have that. Now, how big an area is that? How many people are going to be in there? That requires a little bit further study. It might be that the stage pushes back a little bit, but we're also trying to keep all of the walkways that have already been and are in place. We don't want to tear things up. We want to add to things as we go along. And our sense is that you could do that. So that's why we wanted to have a little bit of a beachfront area immediately adjacent. You could have a sand volleyball court there. You can have a little space for young families to take their kids to the sand, and they can play in the sand. And then the other contentious element was looking at potential tennis court and pickleball courts. Pickleball popularity is through the roof in the United States. I don't know why. It's because it's small, because it's fast, and because it's a lot of fun to play. And our sense was, look, there isn't really anything like that nearby, and it's going to be an attractor. People are going to, they're going to be like, let's go play pickleball at Bayfront Park. So for us, it was, it's also relatively inexpensive to build because they're so small. But some of the more tennis friendly people on the visioning committee and myself, because I love tennis, we thought, well, let's have at least one tennis court and perhaps a couple of tennis courts or pickleball courts. The actual number of this was the subject of a lot of debate. So this represents where we kind of landed. Okay. I guess we also want to talk a little bit about the importance of the Veterans Memorial. It's a really important grounding element here. And my sense is, looking at this, is, look, it would be great if you could have some covered seating, or some tree, or some shaded seating of some kind, some planted vegetation, to make it feel really special, because it's out there right now, and it looks good. The grass comes right up to it. Our sense is, why not make it more, give it a more of a presence, have, get a sense of arrival as you're walking to it. You can do that with planting, you can do that with some vertical elements. There's things that you can do to help it, make it feel special. It should be a special place. It's a good place for contemplation. It's also where people like to take their dogs. Dogs are like, constantly people taking their dogs around here. Not to the memorial itself, but around it. And then we're also talking about a number 12 coming along here, a boardwalk that takes you almost out into the water and then back around. I suppose that there's some possibility for wetlands restoration between that boardwalk and the current edge of water. So there's a possibility for that, kind of in the way that the boardwalk, or how the boardwalk functions at Lighthouse Beach as well. That was, to replicate some of that element, because it's a really great space out there. We think it feels really good. We want to bring some of that to Bayfront Park as well. Because of the way that Bayfront Park was laying out, by the way, is why we felt, look, we really need to do something with City Harbor. It's really right there, right? So that's the reason that City Harbor as a district came about. It was during the course of this conversation. Again, the steps and dedicated restroom facilities. I know we have some restrooms on the pier itself as well, but if you have an amphitheater that's going to be programmed, it's important to have some restroom facilities associated with it as well. Any questions about that so far?
Which way does the amphitheater point?
Right now, it's kind of, it's pointing south, southwest.
Yes.
Kind of an angle, south.
Sort of downtown, but a little bit away.
It doesn't face west, it's facing southwest.
Yes.
But again, and that's,
I
however,
always thought it was gonna face out towards the bay, so I just.
no, I think we looked at that for, for events and Kenya, and sun would be facing, the
There's a
audience.
lot, there's considerations like that to think about. There's also the topography to think about. So there's a number of things. Again, this is.
And those are the kind of things we decide in detail design.
That's right. Yeah, this is something that much further down the line, there are people that are specialists in that sort of design, and that's who we bring on board. Same thing with the short-term, midterm, long-term projects, your graphic identity, you're finding your banners. Those are the things that are cheap and easy to do up front. The preservation area is something that's fairly easy to do. Basically, you just rope it off and make sure that nobody goes into it, that kind of thing. The disc golf course is a midterm. Expanding the multimodal trails is a midterm project as well. And then your longer term projects, the beach itself, and the amphitheater, right? Those are your big long-term projects. And so here's a vision of what that would begin to look like. Again, you don't have to do an awful lot to enhance a place, right? The bones of it are already there. You're simply trying to enhance it in some sort of way. And sometimes that's as easy as some good hardy plants that begin to add structure, that begin to frame the way that the thing is perceived. Okay. Bayfront Park Pier, obviously the fish is the icon for this district. This is the district that, this one and the marina are the ones that need the least amount of intervention, because the elements are already there, because people love it already as is. So there isn't an awful lot that we need to do to it if we go to the next one. But there are a couple of things that we could begin to look at that could help to enhance the people spaces that are there already. In particular, I'm thinking of the picnic shelters at sort of towards the end of the pier. The playground, that playground gets used. It's fine. Could it be better? Sure. Is that a priority? Not necessarily, right? If it's working, it's okay. If we want to think about improving it, that's a kind of a future project. But the direction from the visioning committee and from the city was very clear. Because at one point I was like, nah, get rid of the cars. And the visioning committee in the city said, no, let's.
Yeah,
try to
we
keep it."
vetoed that.
Yeah. But one thing that we can talk about is looking at a ground mural in the, in sort of the main area itself, because again, that begins to add a sense of, oh, did I arrive, a sense of arrival, or a sense that you're in somewhere that's different and special, and it's not just a concrete field. It begins to add a little bit of depth, a little bit of complexity. It makes it a little bit richer. And that's what we're trying to do is to give a sense that this is a special place. And the other thing that we're talking about is like, look, let's be a little bit more intentional with the way that we divide how the vehicles are going to behave here in terms of parking spaces, in terms of striping, just to make, because it's kind of a free for all. People are driving wherever the heck they want, and which is okay. But when you have people walking around, again, it's purely a pedestrian safety issue, right? You want to make sure that the cars are behaving in the proper way and giving people sufficient room to do things. One thing that we did think about, I think you can go to one more. One thing that we did think about is, and so this is the example of what that ground mural could begin to look like. Just something graphic on the ground. It's really cheap and easy. But one thing that's not cheap and easy are these vertical structures that could begin to define. You know, you could hang some lights, and it begins to look really good at night. That sort of thing. The idea is to activate the space at different times of the day. In the, you know, at noon in summer, it's, you know, people are going to be under the shade, but at night it's nice and warm. And so how about try to make it as pleasant as you can. Have some food trucks, have some seating out there, seating that's not permanent, but you know, like folding chairs and things like that. Something that's really inexpensive, but could begin to create a sense of specialness. There was a project in Boston that did this. It was just supposed to be a parking lot, and the people that owned it were like, well, why can't we try something a little bit different? They put some paint on the ground. They kind of gave it some organization. They did some vertical elements, and it became a hugely popular space for young people in particular. So that's kind of the idea, is we're trying to find a way to make it very inexpensive to have some night activities there. For the my sense is that the you know, it's working as is. Perhaps there could be some minor adjustments to make to it, but more than anything else, the marina suffers from a poor front porch, so to speak. So if you begin to enhance that, and the easiest way is with landscape, and you create this kind of sense of gardens out there, then all of a sudden the perception of the marina begins to change. And to some extent, you know, the conversation has been, look, Port Lavaca is not a yacht club, and we're never going to be a yacht club, and that's how it is. And that's totally fine. But I still think that the marina as an element, as a kind of a iconographic element is really good, right? Because it talks about the different uses of the water. So it's not something that we should shun, but instead celebrate, and you can do it fairly inexpensively by having a kind of a slightly better organization to the way that people are going to be moving through it. That's the idea. Let's go to the plan. So that's what number one is about. We're still going to have the vehicles. We hear it loud and clear that we want vehicles to be able to go through here. The way in which the vehicles do that is a subject of debate and something that we've been talking about quite a bit. But suffice it to say that we're going to have a one-way in and out. It's basically what we've come at, is let cars enter through one way and they're going to exit. What is this, Leona Street that they're coming out on?
Yeah, I think we're coming. Yeah, Leona goes one way. I think that's.
Or are we going the other
in.
way?
We're
Are we
coming
going in on Leona? So we're coming in on Leona and it's coming through here.
But I
and
think
you're
that,
out
but
this way.
yeah, behind Nautical Landings, it would go in and out there. We can come in from Main Street here, but then we can, they'll be able to turn around back out.
Okay,
But you're not going to be able to continue on and go out Leona. That'll be one way going the other direction.
okay. So there's still some, you know, detail work that has to happen through here, but the overall, what we're saying is control and contain the vehicular traffic flow, provide some landscape framework for the marina itself. Potentially improve lighting at the marina itself. Again, that's a longer term project. You can see that the list of improvements is minimal. Again, the graphic identity and the wayfinding, the banners, that sort of stuff, that's your easy stuff. And then your aesthetic enhancements, your gardens and things like that, that's what could take a little bit longer. Okay, now we move to Smith Harbor. Smith Harbor, the icon is a gull. Our sense is that, again, this is the passive recreation for, that's the identity of this space, but that doesn't mean that nothing happens there. Rather that it's not ball playing, it's not, you know, that kind of like, you're not gonna have people running through here, although I'm sure that there's some people might. But we do want to kind of focus on the bird watching, on pedagogical elements like outdoor classrooms, things like that. Let's go to the plan, it's easier to see. So this is kind of the idea. Use what the elements are already there. So I know that some of the spoils are not going to remain, they're going to be used elsewhere. But if there were to be spoils, then you can have something like a viewing mound that gives you just a little bit of elevation change and provides a landscape element in landscape history that's called a snail mound. So you can make a very small snail mound. It's almost like I'm blanking, like a labyrinth. If anybody has seen labyrinths that are associated with like cathedrals and things like that, it's a meditative kind of path that you take through. That's kind of the idea for the snail mound, is that it's this walk that takes you up to a viewing point. But we would also have things like outdoor classrooms. We'd have lookouts in number 5. Number 10 could be an outpost that could be have a little bit more structure, and the perspective in just a second will show you what it is to look like. There is no specific vision for what that structure could look like, but the point is to have some kind of a structure that's elevated that you can go up onto and do some bird watching there, or even just get views of back to downtown or of Bayfront Park itself. We have an expanded boardwalk network coming out, taking you to different points. Wetland restoration that's taking us out to the kind of the former jetties that are out there, the collapsed piers and things like that. Things that are becoming essentially becoming habitat for all kinds of water life.
We still have poor boys.
Oh, yeah, and absolutely, sort of one of the grounding element is four-way bait shop. And to enhance the area that's immediately around it, so that it's not just, a kind of a tack on at the end, but rather a signature moment of Smith Harbor itself. So creating a little bit more, again, more restroom facilities, having a walkway that takes you out to, but also to Po'boy, but also out into the shop, into the Smith Harbor Park, and a jetty that would, or an expanded jetty that would help to provide additional coastline protection. Yes, sir.
So what's the vision about the classroom? Are you, like, school district coming in and having studies and?
That's right. Yeah, they could look at what
We're on the coast, and that's a great opportunity for students. I noticed that the old dredges are still in this. I didn't know. I thought we were.
Well, we're close. We got a restore grant. We have the contract. We reviewed the contract. We've sent it back to them, to TCQ, and TCQ is in the process of reviewing our. And so bottom line, we don't have a signed contract yet. It's just been a very, very long process.
So there's a potential we could get those.
Yes, it's going to be, they're either going to be removed or they're going to be left, because when we come in here and do our breakwater project, the living shoreline project, we really need those things gone, because it's going to be hard to get them out once the breakwater project's done. But right now we seem to be on target. The timing should work out that we'll be able to get those things out prior to our construction of the breakwater.
Good. Thank you.
The only bad thing about that used to be a really good fishing spot.
Throw some shell.
similar situation here with the short-term, midterm, and long-term projects. Where, you know, the things like an outdoor classroom, you know, when we set our classroom, you know, what does that really mean? It doesn't require an awful lot of construction, right? It's not an enclosed space. It could be a covered, certainly could be a covered space. But it's simply a place that's set aside that has sufficient infrastructure to allow for some kind of a presentation to take place. Maybe some locations for seating, there could be some built-in seating as well, right? It's, at this point, there's a lot of ways in which it could go. But the idea is that it's not necessarily all that expensive. It can be done fairly inexpensively. And that's kind of the before and after of what you begin to look like. That's a potential for what that outpost could begin to be. I think this one is in Norway right now. We're bringing Norway to Fort Lavaca. And so then there you get a sense of the kind of elevated boardwalk that we do that would take you through there. You know, improving the street scene of Commerce Street is important. And some of this, there would be, you know, we talked about the community gardens as a kind of a fulcrum into Smith Harbor as well. I like that idea in particular because, you know, because Smith Harbor is supposed to be a very natural space, a community garden or a controlled garden situation is taking those natural elements and making it a little bit more man-made, that kind of thing, right? So that's, for me, it was a really kind of a natural transition into the habitat restoration of what Smith Harbor wants to be. Okay, our last group is I gotta change that image. Our last district is City Harbor itself. One of the things that we heard quite a lot is we need to be able to have spaces of nighttime management. We need to be able to take better advantage of sort of the commercial aspect of the harbor itself. Obviously, Smith Harbor, we didn't want to touch in that way. We didn't want to turn it into this active nighttime thing. Similarly, the marina and the pier the programs are already there. When I say program, it means the types of things that can happen in a space. That's what we call program. So the program for the marina and the pier are already there. We don't need to mess with that. And to some extent, the commons is the active course, so it didn't belong there. So we needed another space to be able to think about, you know, what does that begin to look like, and that's what the City Harbor District ultimately came to be. So again, it's about taking advantage of the urban fabric that is there already. So it's not about adding new things necessarily, at least in terms of retail or restaurants or things like that, but to use the buildings that are there as a kind of a background or a backdrop and add on to it. Now, one of the things that we did talk about, it was a lot of discussion, is a restaurant that could take advantage of the proximity to the bay. You could take your boat and drive up right up to the restaurant, and then you'd have your restaurant experience right there on the water. That was something that was talked about a lot. And to some extent, your city is not in the business of opening a restaurant. So, you know, what we could do is provide the framework for that to happen, but we can't, you know, make the horse drink. We can lead them there, and that's about it. Again, it's about creating a sense of arrival, a sense of specialness. That's what number one is, right? So you have an area where you can introduce the big traffic, have a drop off, have a ballet type situation. You can have outdoor patio decks, a potential beer garden next to the historic cemetery. I don't know how that's going to work, but maybe it could work.
Very cool.
Yeah, number 3 still needs to be redone because number 3's not on.
Oh, yeah,
cemetery
I just
yet.
gotta shut it
Hasn't been
over.
corrected
Okay,
yet.
okay. I'll make it up. But one thing that we did end up talking to a little bit about, and I'm going to talk about it later, is the possibility for infill housing, number 7 over here, right? Housing is still something that's a kind of a concern, and you know, how do you make interesting housing for for all the industry that's here, which is quite a lot and seems to not decrease, which is great for the city, but you have to find a way to have those people be here as opposed to living in Victoria or some distance away. Right, so this is a beginning of that conversation. How do we begin to have that kind of land use for Lavaca? And it kind of makes sense to have it in the context of a district like this one. It doesn't fit into any of the other ones. Main Street, maybe a little bit, right? There could be some residential adaptive reuse residential projects there with some of the older structures, which that would be really great. But for new construction, kind of construction, our sense was like, look, why don't you look at some of the land that is vacant and see if there's a way of having some townhomes, some slightly more dense housing. That's the point of that there. Did you have some?
No, and I was just, like this parking down here, that 6, I mean, that would be your parking for like your beer garden. For
Yeah.
This restaurant here, I mean, you're not gonna necessarily be able to park at the front door, you'd have assigned parking that then you would walk either this way or potentially around this way to get to the restaurant
Yeah.
over here if that were to actually expand.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's the landform itself is a little funny. We're a little bit constrained in certain spaces. We're trying to make the best use of land that we have. That's the goal anyway. All right. Similar situation with long-term, what's short-term. I do love a pop-up shop. I think pop-up shops are really great. I think there's a lot of potential for that. That just means like a weekend market, like a farmer's market type of thing, and it's about cultivating that in the right way. I think that it just takes having somebody dedicated to curating it in the proper manner, right? Like finding interesting vendors that you wouldn't find anywhere else. And then that's how you begin to provide the kind of the destination aspect of it. Yeah, let's go. Anyway, these are some examples of what that reuse of an industrial area might begin to look like, what that outdoor deck with bay access begins to look like. That's the feel that we're trying to achieve with this district. Okay, and that takes us to the overall. This is a lot of stuff. It's a big site, a lot of different things that are happening on it. And again, it's by breaking it down into these discrete units that we begin to make sense of it. Otherwise, it's just there's a little bit too much. But one thing that I do want to talk about in general is that, and this is my secret hope for Lavaca, is that there's an opportunity for expanded housing, because it just seems to me like this is great. This is if we can pull this off, wow, geniuses. But you need to have the people, and in order to have the people, you have to have the housing. How do you get to that? And to some extent, you have to do both things at the same time. It's not like one thing can come before the other one. You sort of have to build both things up at the same time. Seems to me. Any other thoughts? I am out of gas.
Yeah. Does anybody from the visioning committee want to say anything in particular? Because I mean, Ernesto's done a good job of kind of summarizing what. I mean, I want everybody to know there was a lot of dialogue that went on at all our meetings back and forth, and a whole lot, yes. Yeah.
I like the idea of color, because when I was on an exchange program in Europe, there are certain places what they did was downtown was the color. And you mentioned that was cheap. The certain area would be designated yellow, blue, whatever.
Yeah.
I think the fact that we have an awesome place here, but I think color, just that as a starting point, if we can approve this, then the starting would be color. And just do that, because I think that's going to make an impression on people. Because the only thing you've done is you painted some signs, or you painted some poles or whatever.
Yeah.
People notice that. Although I would, one recommendation, because instead of the purple with LSU, you might want to use maroon. For
Getting a whole lot of-
We'll start from.
I grew up in New Jersey and, you know, like, it was never nearly as color sensitive as it is down here. Good God. It's pretty interesting.
Larry, you want to say something?
I think it looks great. I know. Did a lot to accomplish this. Remind me what the plan is to acquire it and pay for it.
Yeah, right. That's a good question. And
Maintain it.
Yeah, well, and that has to be part of it as well.
Yeah.
Anything we do has got to have a maintenance function.
Yeah.
I mean, the first step is adopting the plan, and then we can use that. There's many resources for grants. But the first thing, they want to see the vision. You know, with this, then we have a much better chance of getting, you know, TxDOT has grants, Parks and Wildlife has grants. I know there's many foundations that have grants as well, that we can, you know, leverage some of our money with these grants and get some of these things, you know, started and completed.
Yeah, you would almost just have to hire to keep all that stuff maintained. It's hard to bring on enough people to do that. And that's a lot, keeping all your landscaping and all that.
Yeah, I mean,
That's
well,
a
and
lot
what we're
of work.
doing now is anytime we are investing in landscaping, we invest in a contractor maintaining that landscaping.
And there are also things that you can do with the types of plants that you pick out so that you know, you're not
That's right.
using gobs of water on it as well, right? So yeah, there's smart planting choices that you can make. True that the maintenance aspect is serious. Now, there, as Jody mentioned, there's a whole host of grants out there at the state level, at the national level that, yeah, it's gonna take a concerted effort to go after those things, but that's the way that it's gonna have to happen. I used to work for an organization called Art Place America. They had a 10-year mission, so now they're defunct, but they would go around and fund specific creative placemaking projects. That's why I was like, oh my God, this is what it is. And there was a lot of money, there's a lot of money out there. There's a lot of foundations that are looking for ways to give money. And I think that Jody's right. If you have the vision, if you have the story, if you can tell it the right way, you can go after it and get those grants.
Anything else?
Yeah, anything else at all?
Yeah, CJ?
Public experience in following along with this, where would be, what would be the best way for them to follow along and be able to get on progress on this?
On the city's website, we have a projects page, and we have right now, all this information. It's on a dashboard, a community development dashboard. And I'll send you the link and you can put it in the paper, but we've got everything is on our website. You just there's a way to navigate to get it to look at it. But even what we just saw here, I've already put it up on the web, so it does. The people, citizens can access it. And
It's on Facebook then, right?
yeah, yeah. Okay, well, if we're done with this one, we can, if there's nothing else, we can go on. We got a couple other, yes, Robert.
Just one quick question.
Uh-huh.
You can go about, lots of grant money and stuff like that. Is there any, plans, strategic plans for soliciting private investment? In these projects? Because because what I think we'll do is put a larger burden over your municipal services. Because sometimes you get grant money and you build it and it's hell to maintain. I think that this thing to be viable in the short term as well in the long term, is there needs to be some sort of plan that says, look, we'll do a 60-40 split or 50-50 split. You're going to really go out there and solicit some private investment, people with some money, for corporations who want to make an investment in Fort Lavaca that are for-profit entities that have some skin in the game. And I think that's how you, again, short-term and long-term, maintain an investment of this size, because those folks have a vested interest in seeing, let's say, for instance, if you part out of it and say, look, this is gonna incentivize this investor to come in there and revitalize this certain area for restaurants and shops.
Yeah.
And let them put their dollars
Yeah,
on the line.
Yeah, I know you're entirely right. The future of public spaces in America is a public-private situation. I've seen it in Houston a whole bunch. It happens throughout the country that way, right? Because municipalities simply don't have the resources to be able to cover the maintenance alone, just the maintenance alone. So it is a very common practice these days to be doing those things, but you have to have something that they can latch onto, right? You gotta give them something to bite onto, and that takes some flexibility in thinking on our part.
Yeah, I mean, that's clearly, what we're looking at here in the city harbor district.
Well, Jody, back up to that one, of course, a few years ago, when we purchased that area right there.
Where?
Right there near those houses to the right, East Wilson Street
Oh,
area
here.
and all that. We purchased that as a,
Right.
to hold that to where if somebody did come in and make a nice development there.
And that,
It's
right,
it's
that's
done for economic development. And
right.
Solid
They,
block.
I mean.
Yeah, that's
it
kind of
was
what we're,
my impression that we would almost let that go at a very cheap price.
Correct.
to Somebody, as long as they can assure us they're gonna do a really nice project there,
I mean, that's
what-
similar to what the city did with what is now Scully's, because
Yeah.
the city owned that.
Yeah.
But they sold it with the understanding it was gonna be made into a restaurant and developed.
So
So
that's
that-
what I'm saying,
yeah.
that would be an area for somebody as a private investor that would really want to do something nice to consider.
And even where the old freezer plant was, that potentially could be something like that as well.
So you were talking about the deck out there off the harbor, and the lower deck, the lower, dock is a working dock.
Correct.
They have trucks, pickup trucks on.
Yeah.
Right.
Boats, nets, all kinds.
Yeah, we don't want the public running around down there.
Right.
They're on the upper deck.
However, I would say that kind of intensity is not a detractor.
No, I agree. People
Yeah.
want to see that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a working dock, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I know it's, anybody want to take a break
Just
or
take a 10-minute break and.
turn the lights on?
Chance for people to discuss this before we go on to our other agenda items.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions for me, please.
Not here for those items. One question. There's no action on this thing now that we've had.
No, it's a workshop.
It's
a workshop.
Workshop only, so when is the action item?
We will take it to council for official adoption, probably the next meeting.
I don't know.
That's that's.
Just calling up in there, but starting. This is their associate. All right, let's go.
Okay. Right now. It's from that point. Grab the agenda.
Right, we're gonna reopen the meeting. The workshop, and we're gonna move on to agenda item 2, review online sidewalk plan for the city of Port Lavaca for future adoption by council. Jody?
We are in the process of making application to TxDOT for an alternative patients grant to construct fair use paths on both sides of Independence in conjunction with council has budgeted funds to reconstruct Independence with curb and gutter and underground drainage from Virginia Street to Hackley Road. Now, the application for the alternative transportation grant will provide a 10-foot wide shared use path behind the curb from Virginia to Sand Crab. And then it's actually shown on here. And then from Sand Crab, or from Independence down Sand Crab to join in with some existing sidewalk that's, I think, 7 or 8 feet wide in front of the high school itself. And also provide a shared use path at this point in Independence, near where the apartments are currently being built, back behind the Bordeaux apartments, to come into the back side of HEB, to where people that live in the multifamily developments in that area would be able to ride their bike or walk to HEB, as opposed to having to get in their car and drive around and go in the parking lot. So as part of that application, already passed the first stage, which we submitted a preliminary application, and TxDOT has approved that, and they've given us the go-ahead to present or apply for a full-blown application. So in part of that, one of the things that we need to show is that that will go in our favor anyway, is to show that this is part of a plan. I've had this sidewalk plan, it's one working sidewalk plan. It's kind of what staff and planning board we kind of use to kind of look at the pedestrian traffic patterns around the city and come up with recommendations on where to put future sidewalks. This is online on the website. It's been on there for some time. It's linked on the city manager website. I mean, the city manager page on the city's website. And the legend is over there on the side, and the black lines are existing sidewalks and shared use paths. The purple lines are future shared use paths, and the orange lines are potential locations for 5-foot minimum wide sidewalks. And then there's also some pink lines that are potential places for bike paths or bike lanes. What I would like to do at the April council meeting, if not April, May for sure, because the TxDOT application is due in June. I need council to consider officially adopting this as a sidewalk plan. So I can, basically check a box in the application showing that, yeah, I will give them the link and show we had this plan, but it doesn't mean a whole lot if it hasn't been adopted by council. And so, you know, again, it's just like what we were talking about before. This isn't set in stone. This doesn't necessarily give us a timetable or anything, but this is a plan. What we recognize, these are traffic patterns for pedestrians, and this is where we would like to see sidewalks. So between now and when we, you know, if we do this in April or in May, I mean, I'd like to take a closer look at this and see if there's any areas that, you know, we would like to include in this, someplace that we would like to definitely see sidewalks. I can real quickly tell you, show you some of the things that I do have in here that we've discussed in the past. I mean, of course, we do have, this area here, which is what we're looking at for this particular grant, which is on both sides of Independence, down Sand Crab, and then back behind the HEB. Now we are showing, potentially, because this could be another phase for a TxDOT grant in 2 years, bike shared use path that goes up to Oakland, maybe on down to Highway 35 here. We're showing, sidewalks all along the gaps in Virginia Street. We're showing the shared use path on Railroad that's in conjunction with some of the master planning we've been talking about. Bike lanes associated with South Commerce and along the waterfront areas like we were talking about before. We probably need to look at a location of a sidewalk that to walk from South Street up to Austin Street and ultimately all the way up to Travis, because there are kids that do walk to school from this south part of town. I've a few people in the neighborhood, and the general consensus has been Benavides would probably be the best place for that. But, at this point, it's just, we recognize that we need a sidewalk that goes from South Street to Austin and then on up, whether that's Benavides, San Antonio, or whatever, that could be decided at a later date. But at this point, it's showing on Benavides. We are in the process, as you know, of doing design work to construct these streets in Alamo Heights Section 2, and there will be sidewalks along one side of those roads in conjunction with that project, and ultimately sidewalk at least on one side, if not both sides, of 3rd and 5th Street. And I don't have 7th on here, but that would probably be on 7th as well. Sitting here thinking about it. So that, I mean, that's basically it. Well, I'm also showing here on Smith Road to continue that sidewalk all the way along behind the curb up Smith Road, and then potentially consider a bike lane that would go from all the way down Smith Road, cross the highway, and have potentially bike lanes on Broadway. Again, I have told TxDOT that before they restripe, essentially before they restripe anything in the city, to let us know. So I can come to council and say, is that something we would be interested in incorporating bike lanes in? I had asked them that about Broadway. Right when I got into this position, it was a little too late in their planning. Basically, what they told me that it could be done, but we would lose the continuous turn lane on this section of Broadway. But in looking at that, I mean, you could still have 2 lanes on both sides in your bike lane. Yeah, you wouldn't have a continuous turn lane, but I think with the 2 lanes, you would still, it wouldn't hinder anything, especially since we're not establishing this as like a truck route or anything, trying to limit speeding cars in this section of the city anyway. But just looking at the big plan picture, that would make sense to have a bike route that would come from this area of town, take us all the way down to get to Bayfront in the Main Street area by bike. That's what's on here now. Again, my hope is that I can take this to council and adopt the plan as it's presented here. Of course, it's things we can adjust and add to and amend later on. But I can show it that it's adopted as part of this application that we've got, that will be due the early part of June, the TxDOT, that will, if approved, will construct the shared use paths along Independence as shown here.
Okay, that would save us a lot on the reconstruction of Independence Drive also, wouldn't it? We originally had wanted to put in sidewalks.
Right, I mean, our plan was, we were gonna, council was planning on looking at the dollars, what it was gonna cost to do the improvements on Independence and also provide sidewalks, because anybody that follows Facebook knows we get complaints all the time, why hasn't city built sidewalks? And, kids do walk from the Bordeaux apartments and some of the areas over there to the high school and in the middle of the road sometimes. I've had people send me pictures. The road as it is right now is just simply not conducive to sidewalks.
That's all tonight, just to see.
Yeah, and so, right, and so we're gonna reconstruct it with curbing gutter to where we can build sidewalks. And council was ready to budget that at the time. As we were doing that, that's when TxDOT came up with this opportunity, this alternate transportation grant. Like I said, they are getting very interested in promoting pedestrian safety. And so as a part of this is a grant that's been around for a while, comes around, I think, every 2 years, but they have a lot of money this year, more than they've had in the past, and they're really promoting this. And they had made a presentation at the local Rotary when I first heard about it. I said, hey, I got a project, sounds perfect for this. And it is. I mean, they are all, TxDOT is excited for the project. And so I think we have a really good chance of getting it. Of course, the decision makers are in Austin, not the regional one. So we want to make sure we're, able to answer in the affirmative as many of the questions as we can on the application. One of them being, is this part of an adopted plan? Yes. So that's the objective, to officially adopt this as our sidewalk plan. This, you can spend a lot of money and get a consultant in here and do kind of what we did here with the sidewalk plan, pedestrian plan. This is adequate for what TxDOT needs. They thought this was great. We just need to adopt it. So that's what my hope is for the next council meeting or the one after that.
Sure.
Didn't some of our discussions talk about taking that way to 10.5?
The road will go all the way to,
Oh.
but the sidewalks, and
Oh.
we even talked about that with TxDOT. It doesn't go in there. And so, and there's no future plan. We feel that we've got a much better chance of getting the grant and not, them start thinking negatively about it if we stop it at and take it to the high school. Because trying to go all the way to Half League, where are we going? There's nothing there right now anyway.
Well, we don't have water all the way down Independence, do we?
Yes,
We do?
we have water, but the Independence will be constricted to such that you could still put the shared use path behind the curb at a later date.
Yeah.
So if something went out there and there was a need for a sidewalk, shared use path, whatever, we could still do it at a later date.
I just don't want to get into a situation where we cut the road again to put some kind of water on the other side like they did right there at Sandcraft Boulevard, and that's a real good bump there. And they had to cut to put water on.
Yeah, the only thing that may, quite honestly, is new taps. We can do some anticipation. We're talking about that, maybe taking some of the 6-inch, a couple places, take the 6-inch line across the road. So we have it on that side, but, potentially there could be a tap that could do. The water line is on the north side of the road, but it is a 12-inch water line. But of course, sometimes you have to bring a tap across.
I know there's gonna be some activity there real soon. There's 3 culverts, temporary culverts put in right now.
Yeah. There's a
2
daycare.
Yeah.
The other places, they don't know they haven't said what they're gonna do yet. But there is a daycare coming in. Is there anything else on this?
Comments to agenda item number 3, discuss elements to include a proposed landscape ordinance in anticipation of making an application to the Scenic City Certification Program.
Okay, this one. One thing I've been looking at honestly since about 2017. When I saw this at TML, I know Tim's talked to him a couple of times too. There is a program called Scenic Texas. And part of Scenic Texas is a Scenic City certification. Scenic Texas was inspired by the leadership of Lady Bird Johnson, and she was First Lady. And she, as you know, she was instrumental in getting our highways beautified with wildflowers at this time of year. And they are the only nonprofit that's dedicated to the preservation and enhancement of the state's visual environment. And so there is a program where you can apply and become certified as a scenic city. Once you're in the program, there are more resources available to help us continue to improve our scenic ability. They can provide help with writing ordinances, maintenance, all that sort of thing. They're a think tank sort of, and just it's be nice to have that certification. It's something that you can put on your letterheads and stuff, to promote Port Lavaca, to show that we care about our appearance and maintenance, like we've been mentioning. We're looking like we feel this is a great place to be. And so one of the there's the minimum requirements. There's 3 elements to the very minimum requirements. And at this point, I would like to make application. The deadline isn't at the end of April. It comes around just once a year. It opened in February, and initially I thought the deadline was the end of March. But once I realized it wasn't until the end of April, I thought, well, maybe I got a chance to get some time and actually do it this year, to at least get in there at a minimum level. Once you get in, like I said, they can help you improve and go up into the ranks. So one of the requirements is that we have to have a landscape ordinance. Actually, this is one of the things that's on our to-do list in our comprehensive plan. Actually, it was the #1 item, was to develop a landscape regulation for non-residential multifamily developments. And so I plan on bringing an initial landscape ordinance to council on April 10th. At this point, I'm looking for something that's very basic. I don't want to get overboard at this point, something that's easy to comply with. We're consulting with some area architectural engineers, not landscape architects, to make sure that what we've got is something that wouldn't be too much of a burden to developers. Basically, the developers that are coming in, they kind of do this on their own already, most of them. And so this is just putting it in ordinance that this is what we expect our developers to do, and give them some guidance on regulations for doing that. So this would apply to new development, redevelopment, and any substantial improvements. In the ordinance, we would define exactly what those are. But again, it's not residential, not single family home residential, it's for commercial and multifamily developments. Right now we've looked at several other cities in the region, and we're considering a minimum of a 10% of the available site. And the available site is defined as the whole area of the private property that's being developed, and subtracting the building footprints. What's left after you take the area of the buildings, what's left? 10% of that area needs to be landscaping. And then 70% of that required area needs to be in the front. are basically between the front of the building and the curb. So it's actually seen, there's no point in doing all this landscaping, it's in the backyard, no, you can't see it anyway. So 70% of it needs to be in the front. There'll be a provision that the development committee, which basically is made up of staff, that looks at these developments before we give them the go ahead to start putting things together. There'll be a way to, make vary that if need be, like on a multifamily development where it makes sense to have landscaping throughout the property and not just on one road. So there'll be some room for variances to just be in the front. Let's see what else is on here. In the ordinance, it will also state that the plants have to be suitable for our region, and we're looking at referencing the USDA hardiness zone map that's available online that will provide guidance on what plants are good for this area, because we don't want to put a plant that's going to die or that takes too much watering or whatever. Now, if somebody wanted to put in a plant that's not on a list, they could do it. It's just not going to count towards their 10% that they have to. Is what we're proposing at this point. If a plant is listed on that list as invasive or noxious, then they would not be allowed to put it in. I did include just some of the verbiage that we're looking at proposing in the ordinance. Landscape areas would need to be protected somehow so cars can't drive right through them, whether curbing or some kind of border. We've got at least one tree per 800 square feet. And there's the size of the tree is dictated. And again, the landscaping needs to be on a private property in the right of way. Elsewhere in our ordinance, it requires that they construct a sidewalk. They'll construct a sidewalk, but then they also need to provide grass sod in the right of way. We don't want landscaping necessarily in our right of way, but in grass. Now, there may be some extenuating circumstances where, somebody wants to put it in the right of way and it doesn't, and it's okay. Those kind of things would be on a case by case basis, but as a rule, the landscaping is on private property. And there's a provision right now we're looking at that they would have to maintain it at least for a year. I mean, we can expand upon that. Again, the minimum requirements for the scenic Texas is just that we require it. I think even the minimum requirements don't require a regulation for maintenance. I think we need to at least add for at least a year. But those are the kind of things what we're looking at. So, feel free to give me some input between now and April 10th if you have any ideas one way or another about this. And again, we'll have 2 readings. We'll have something for y'all to consider at April 10th meeting, and then we'll be able to make edits at that point, and we'll hopefully adopt at the end of April. We are going to take this to the planning board at their next meeting, just to get their input as well, before we finalize a draft to bring to you on the 10th. Any questions?
Let's move on. Agenda item number 4, discuss possible changes to the chapter 36 sign ordinance. Ready?
Okay. Again, with the scenic city application, there are 2 of the mandatory requirements are 1, to prohibit new off-premise signage. Or billboards is another name that's used often. Our current ordinance does do this, but we feel we need to clarify the language a little bit to make sure it's clear. Again, we're talking about signage, a permanent sign that's not on your property. If you're a commercial business and you are advertising your business on your site, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about big sign, or it doesn't even have to be a big sign, any kind of sign It's not on your property, it's somebody else's property that's advertising your property or your business. That's an off-premise sign. And generally, they're in the term of the billboard. That's what you most commonly know what, billboards. And so this scenic city requirements to be a scenic city is you do not allow any new billboards. They're, can tend to be unsightly, they can distract drivers and that sort of thing. I did notice though, I think there's something in the state legislature that may make this all wet. I don't know. I think there's a bill in the House or Senate that's proposing to get away from any regulation of billboards. But for now, this is what, if we wanted to apply for scenic city, this would be one of the requirements that we prohibit off-premise signage, which, like I said, our ordinance already does this. It just needs to say it a little bit better than it does. So there's
But you can put the signage on your property.
yes.
There's no limit on the size or anything.
Well, no, it still has to be limits to the height.
Right.
Size and everything. But yes,
No, but I'm talking about billboard or something like that.
I mean, if it's advertising your business and it meets, we do have height requirements and I think
Right.
there is a maximum size requirement. But as far as,
It's just trying to keep it from putting it on someone else's property.
right,
State laws, something like that.
yeah. And so then the other requirement that goes along with that is that the ordinance does need to provide a permitting process, which we already do. It needs to dictate the size, placement, and quantity for any signs. We already have the size and the height. Generally, the placement is in our ordinance as well. And the quantity, I think we need to clarify that a little bit for permanent signs. But the thing that we do not address in our ordinance at all that we need to speak to before submitting this application, I think, is signs or these flag signs that we see all over town. I know there's some cities that prohibit them. You can't have them, or they say you're going to have one. At this point, there's nothing in our ordinance that really specifically addresses them. And by practice, what we've been doing, as long as they've been keeping them in good shape, we've kind of allowed them to be there. But I think we need to now really make a decision. Are we going to allow them? And if we do, which I'm thinking if we don't allow them, we're going to get a lot of pushback. I don't have a problem with them, honestly, as long as they're in good shape. But if we're going to allow them, then we have to think, okay, how many are we going to allow? Like I said, some cities say one per business. Quite honestly, I think we're gonna get a lot of pushback with that. Looking around town, it seems like those that have them, many have two. There's some that have three. Now, of course, there's some that have 6 to 10. But to be realistic, I'm thinking 2. And again, this is something the council will look at. We're still looking at other coastal cities to see how they're addressing this. Because they're very popular with the food trucks and some of the touristy type things, which we want to have that kind of ambience. I think I don't think we want to necessarily cut them out. The thing to think about is some of these small businesses. I mean, it takes a lot of money to put up a permanent sign. This is something doesn't cost a whole lot. They can invest in pretty quickly. Put a sign up. They keep it well maintained. It's fine. If you mandate and they have to put up a permanent sign, and then the business goes bust, okay, we got another abandoned sign that we're dealing with. So in that respect, I don't have a real problem with them. I'm thinking as we dictate a maximum number per so many linear feet, and then allow maybe one additional for every additional, say, 100 feet of frontage or something. So, for example, you'd say 2. You're allowed for the first 100 feet, you're allowed 2, and you got 1 more for every 100 feet after that. Or maybe say 3 for the first 150 feet, with 100 feet after that. So, what I encourage you to do, kind of go around town, look at some of these, see how a regulation like that might affect some of these people, and think about it. Because, and again, if we want to make this application, we have to have a limit. Right now, we really don't have a limit.
I'm more inclined to look more into the tattered and needing repaired flags and signs that people leave, having those removed rather than limiting a whole lot of the flag issues, because some businesses do it periodically, like
Right.
the dealerships and in different places, just do it now and then, but it's leaving them out and letting them get tattered and you know, they only last, if they're out permanently, they only last a couple of months most.
Yeah, and that's another thing, whether we, you know, they have to permit them, so we know how many's there. Is the permit good for, say, 6 months before they have to come re-permit, or as long as it's just one permit, as long as they, you know, keep them good, they don't have to ever renew the permit, unless they put a new one up. Like I said, Joey already, he monitors them, and when they start looking tattered, he'll go tell them and they'll pull them up.
Are we doing that with the city's flags too?
We are doing yes, we're doing better. We're doing better on that, I do believe. Yes.
I did have a question about the pole that was at Whataburger.
Mhm.
Are we going to do anything with that?
Well, that's that's the next item on my list. That is not a requirement or minimum requirement. Let's say it's not a minimum requirement, but it is something that I've been wanting to address. And it is something that a lot of cities do address. And it's the issue with abandoned signs. And so to define what an abandoned sign is, it's a sign that has not been used for advertising for 1 year. To identify or advertise a bona fide business, lesser service owner, product or activity, and or for which no legal owner can be found. And so the ordinance would prohibit abandoned signs. So if they've been abandoned, then the sign needs to be taken down. And at least, you know, at least the framework for it. And some of these, if they're big, you know, we can perhaps leave the pole if it's in good shape and maintained, but as far as the empty sign frames with the bulb still there, you know, those need to go.
Well, the pole is the only thing that's there now.
Right, but I'm talking about other places like
I've seen a lot.
the look, you know, where,
Little Caesars, I think they still have their sign up.
yeah, Little Caesars, after they have been gone for a year, but like the two the shopping center signs, they blew out in Hurricane Harvey and they're still not there.
Hey, Jody, let me ask you a question. Okay, like for instance, that pole that Jim's talking about, okay. Of course, in order to put a sign up, you know, you gotta provide engineered drawings and all that for your wind load. I mean, it's a lot, okay?
Right,
So what I'm getting is, those people have that pole there, say something came in where they wanna put a new sign up. They're gonna have to get an engineer to sign off saying that pole is adequate to handle the sign if they wanna put it on that existing pole. And be engineered and stamped saying it'll handle it, is that right?
well, there's several, I mean, there's several ways that we could look at that. I mean, if you could say that the sign post was, well, okay. If we have documentation, or if they have documentation that when the sign was put in of its design strength and it was sealed,
I mean,
well, we should, but not always.
I know.
You know, there, you know, for whatever reason, we may not. So, and you know, and just me, the pole itself, the support structure itself, as long as it's kept painted or like,
That's
I
what
don't
I
have a
think.
problem with that.
That's what I think.
Because, and again, even if somebody we wanted to document the size sign that had been on there.
Yeah.
Keep that on record at City Hall for, you know, future. But again, if we don't have any kind of record, an engineer is gonna have to look at that and do something to, you know.
Of course, the
to
only
figure that out.
downside to that is if we allow them to leave that there, and of course, I know we've been trying to limit some of the heights on the signs. we're gonna be stuck with that one being grandfathered,
Right.
letting them stick
Would
a
it
big
be
old tall
grandfathered
sign.
in because now it's 30 or 35 feet.
Right,
Yeah.
and so that's what I'm saying, I mean, this is an opportunity, I mean, if, again, and other cities do this. If that is not used in a year for anything, it's abandoned and yeah, it goes away. Just like, for example, the really tall sign, at the restaurant next to the movie theater, right? There's a big sign at very top, and we talked about, well, you should take that down, because it was too expensive, right, to do that one up there, so they built one lower down below. Well, but we might want to do that someday. Well, but it just sits there and it doesn't look great, and I mean, if it's not being used for any advertising purposes, it's an abandoned sign,
So
does it go?
in the case of Whataburger, we asked them if they pull down, they said no, they were just gonna take the sign down.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't,
'Cause
that was
they
before my
moved.
time.
They moved,
Okay,
right, and we even gave them a variance to put the bigger sign up, and they still wouldn't take the pole down.
well,
So
it,
so if we had an ordinance in place at the time, then we could have said, well, you gotta move, you got to.
right, I mean, if it
It's
has
written
not
out.
been used I mean, I guess if we enacted this ordinance, if that thing not used
Okay.
within a year, clearly, it would be abandoned and they'd have.
They
take
have
it
to,
down.
they have to remove it.
Yeah, we're not gonna remove it.
Well,
I mean, we could, I guess we're gonna remove it and put a lien of the property or something, but,
yeah, that's,
Yeah.
cause I mean, that's not, it's not cheap either when you're talking about a big old tall
Right.
pole like that, getting it out. And that hole would, you can't take it out of the ground, you gotta have to torch it off. And then fill it full of concrete or plug it off, it's, I mean, that's not
Yeah.
easy. But yeah, I think, I'm just saying, I think we need to fix that in a way that they can't come back, put another big old tall sign up there if we don't wanna keep going in that
no, I mean,
direction.
that would be a new permit, and the only way they could put it one taller than what's in the ordinance is by a variance.
So that pole there, we should just paint it, maroon, right?
So basically, they,
For life.
so what you're saying, they could probably use that pole, say a new, okay, say Leone's or whatever, they wanna put a.
Right,
sign
if they
there.
wanted, yes.
But they gotta have that sign company come cut that pipe off and at least lower that height down.
Yeah,
in our
I mean,
new pipe.
it would need to have an engineer seal on whatever they're doing.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, but the height, I think they're probably leaving it thinking it's grandfathered, but, again, it has used,
Is
Well,
it
it's
just,
a pole, huh?
is it just one sign?
We have to-
Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
So that's engineer, right? The
Yeah.
the one storm engineer.
Right.
Yes.
yes, yeah,
But they don't, you don't know what foundation. on that.
Yeah, that's right.
right, and I mean, that is a tricky thing to do.
Yeah, 'cause
Right.
It could be rusted in half inside and you don't know it.
If there's no, engineered drawings, original engineered drawings when it's, but I wouldn't seal it.
Well, it sounds like, I mean, can you just come up with some draft language for us?
Yes, yeah, and that's,
Sounds like
I mean,
all that.
basically, that's just,
Yeah.
what are your guys' thoughts? But
And
again,
that's another aspect of that too is, Jody, is why would we wanna, of course, say somebody wanted to try to use that pole. And, oh yeah, we had it engineered and everything. Okay, we don't know, really, do they have it engineered? Yeah, they said they do and somebody stamped it. But does that mean they inspected the inside of it, make sure that it's not gonna fall on somebody or their car or whatever? So then, once we approve that, then, well, golly, the city approved it, and then it fell on this people's car, or whatever. So I think it'd be better.
But that's the engineer's professional liability.
Right.
Yeah, I know, but they're still gonna sue.
I mean,
us
it-
involved.
yeah, but I mean, if they have a sealed drawing, I don't know that we can, gonna counter that.
Jody,
But again, the main objective is to handle all the signs that, I mean, the pole's there and there's an empty,
Yeah,
Right.
it's terrible.
it's been there forever.
Well, that sign is
Except
not
for-
being kept painted. It's an eyesore. It just sticks there. It has absolutely no value. And the thing is like, I think as far as Jerry's talking about, we don't know what's happening inside or whatever. And I think it's best to just, because I'm sure that the people that own the restaurant now probably don't know any more about the pole than.
But again, but they
They're
lease the
just
property,
leasing that.
they're just leasing. So again, if the owner of the,
Is
You know.
it
LeBeau.
Whataburger?
no, I don't think it's, I think it's.
Well,
Brooks.
yeah.
Brooks.
Yeah, but they wanna leave it there because it's a value to them to let somebody that wants to rent their building put a sign on there.
But
So-
but they'll need to do it within a year.
Yeah,
If an ordinance like this passed, it would be.
But the height's not grandfathered.
Right, the height's not grandfathered in,
Right, so they would have to modify. it. So.
because it was a whole different.
Yeah, because it hasn't been a
Change.
sign.
yeah, that's.
Right.
it
A
changed.
year from the time we passed the ordinance.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, that's by this definition, now we can say,
Yeah, because it's not a
30 days.
Whataburger again.
Yeah.
but you know,
It's
but
different business.
something realistic,
Yes.
if it's been, you gotta give people
Yeah.
a chance to do something with it.
Yeah.
That whatever's a reasonable amount of time, it's not being used for its intended purpose, then it needs to go away. And I mean, and if they were to replace the face, even if it's white, although, I mean, by this strict definition, it needs to be advertising something. So I don't know if you put a face in there and they said property for sale, that would be okay, but something just not blank. It just looks like it, which it is, it got, destroyed in the hurricane and nothing's happened since.
Aren't you seeing a lot though, where they'll use material? to do it?
Yeah, I mean, something, yeah, they can, instead of a plastic sign face, put something in there. But use it for its intended purpose, not just
That
a
would
decorative art piece of the pole, huh?
Would that have to be engineered if they use material?
Yeah, it really does. I mean, if it's a permanent sign, because it can still. I mean, sometimes that's gonna be a lot easier to seal because. It's kind of like a breakaway sign, probably the sign face would go before it's gonna fail the structure. But, yeah, those are kind of things, Sarah, when you just need to look at what cities are handling, how they're handling. Is that, anybody got any questions? I mean, that's kind of what I'm working towards April 10th. Sounds great. That's good. Okay. All right. That's all I got. Oh, well, real quick, the other thing I forgot to mention on the signs is the other thing we do have to, and I don't think anybody's got a problem with this, prohibit any type of permitting any vehicle that intended purpose is advertised. That they just drive around town, and I didn't know this was a thing.
There was one by apartment complex.
So that that they have signs on the car and they're immobile
They put it.
off premise.
Is there one on the back of the vehicle out there? I just saw it.
Now you're saying we're opposed to that?
It says, no, okay, let me read this. No, and again, this is coming from them. No type of vehicle, including but not limited to cars, trucks, motor vehicles, blah, 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 blah. Similar type of property shall be placed on private property within the city for the purpose of advertising such item for rent, sale, lease, unless such property is on the premises where the owner of such property of advertised for sale or lease resides. So a motor vehicle not used on a regular basis for the transportation of persons or property, or that is inoperable, shall not be parked or stored with one or more signs displayed thereon or otherwise used as a substitute sign structure. Any vehicle containing advertising must be parked in approved parking space. Any such vehicle is prohibited from otherwise being parked on any public right of way, including but not limited to public sidewalks, streets, alleys, blah, blah, blah. Basically, I think it's to prohibit getting around the off premises sign by using a vehicle.
Well, like
Unless it's.
You mean like a food wagon?
Message on your property.
that realtor guy in Victoria has that Kopecki guy has that trailer sitting in that parking lot. It's been there for 5 years. Advertising his real estate company on that.
But it can't be off, I mean.
Well,
Say-
Grace Plumbing's
that.
banned.
Uh,
If it's Grace Plumbing's banned.
On transport workers and.
I think,
That's.
Or the bonding company has a wrap on there.
but I think if it's used, I think it's just, if the intent is just to be a movable sign, if it's
Like
your
you're being
vehicle.
paid to advertise.
Right, if it's
With
your work vehicle and you're advertising your business, we're not talking about that. We're talking about,
I just gotta keep that in mind.
right, that to clarify, yeah, because the intent is for only,
People who get paid to advertise in
Yeah.
the wrap.
yes.
So what about the folks that are outside of furniture, well, on the street, advertising furniture stores and pizza places, and they're grabbing your attention with a flag or
Stand outside.
yeah, do we have
Walking
anything
billboard.
against that, or is that something that we want to look at? Because I'm sure we start getting a lot of that business down here.
That's here.
I saw it.
They do it all the time in Victoria. That's free
Yeah, but
enterprise.
it's just something we
Like,
I would. I think it's weird for us.
Towards any permanent or that could, cut somewhere.
Okay, this is what it says. No permits are allowed to be issued for new outdoor general advertising off-premise devices, whether traditional signs or vehicles employed solely for the purpose of outdoor advertising. Yeah,
That means like I got a vehicle and I'll put a sign to advertise your business for you.
and that's right, and that's all
That-
that's
and not a magnetic sign, it's more like a wrap.
Yeah.
right, yes. Yeah, but that's all it's for.
But a wrap is okay, you just can't put a sign like in the bed of your pickup truck or something.
Yeah,
Right.
and I'll call them and clarify exactly.
I think what they're
What-
saying is if you wrap your car and take it and park in somebody else's parking lot, leave it there. That's what they don't
Well,
want.
that's the advantage.
Right, but I mean, if it's on your,
But if you're driving that vehicle around to advertise your business.
Yeah.
That's not a problem.
Yeah.
but then that wouldn't be its sole purpose either, you know,
Right.
because you've got, it's a work vehicle or whatever, but
HGV trucks, if they're parked on the side of the road. They have a second purpose, they're delivering groceries, but it may be broken down and sitting there for 2 days and
Yeah.
violating our.
Are you parking Walmart? I move we adjourn.
Second. Okay, we have a second. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed, same sign. None opposed.
thank you. Thank you.